So, tēnā koutou katoa, greetings to you all from Aotearoa, Waitaha, Christchurch, Canterbury here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. If this is the very first time you've joined us, I am Sarita McLean, the Regional Rotary Public Image Coordinator, and it is really, really so lovely to see all of you here today. So we're joining together today from across Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, and on behalf of all of us, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of us meet, live, learn, and work. I acknowledge and honor Indigenous cultures, traditions, country, iwi, and nation, and pay my respects as appropriate to leaders and elders, kaumatua and kuia, past, present, and emerging. We're so privileged to have a presenter today, Professor Roland Bleiker, who will be introduced by Assistant Rotary Public Image Coordinator, Daryl Isupi. So over to you, Daryl.
Thank you, Sarita. And firstly, welcome to past International Director, Jessie. Thank you for joining us, and to everybody else for joining us here today as well. Professor Roland Bleiker is the Professor of International Relations and Director of the Rotary Peace Centre at the University of Queensland. Roland has been was co-director when the Peace Fellow program first started at the University of Queensland, and has been with the program ever since. As such, he's been very well connected with Rotary, but today is more about one of Roland's passions, and I'll let him describe that later. Of course, this late start, of course, will have made Roland nervous because he's Swiss, and timing is always one of those things that is very much important to him and his culture. I thank Roland for joining us at this time, because it's been a very busy time for him with the university year, and also the recent trip to Evanston, and his first trip to Evanston actually, for the peace centres. There's been a big change in the way that the peace centres have actually looked at their candidates, and Roland has been a large part of that to actually make sure that the program continues to work very successfully. And part of that success is his different perspective and look on life, and in his passion for photography. With that, I'd like to welcome Professor Roland Bleiker.
Thank you so much, both Sarita and Daryl, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for the opportunity to join you here. So I'm going to go and share my screen then, and I hope it will work for everyone. Can you see the shared screen?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I think everyone except Sarita seems to be able to see it. So look, it's a great pleasure to be able to join you today. And what I have in mind, first of all, to say as well, joining Sarita and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet today. And I want to also pay my respects to their ancestors and descendants. What I have in mind, and I understand we have about an hour altogether, is that right? So I want to first talk a little bit about my background with the Rotary Peace Centre. I can do that as short or as long as you'd like. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the centre. I plan to spend just a few minutes giving you a bit of background about my relationship with Rotary. And then I would like to talk, as Daryl has invited me to do so, on my big passion in research, and that is understanding the role that images, that visual factors play in shaping political issues, including conflict, peace, and so on. So I will talk a little bit on that, but I'd like to make it, if that's okay with you, as interactive as possible. That is, rather than me rambling on for half an hour, feel free to stop me if you have questions, if you want to discuss. I think we can make it quite interactive. But that's sort of the plan I have for what's for the hour that I have been given to join you. Now, first, a few words on the Rotary Peace Centre. Again, I don't quite know how familiar you are with the centre. The centre is now in its 21st year, and I have been very, very lucky to be involved with the centre from the very beginning. I was the first director 21 years ago, then co-director for a couple of years, and I have taken over the directorship again 2 years ago. And ever since then, I have pretty much taught every single class of Rotary Peace Fellows in a master's course I have been teaching. The core of the program is a sponsorship of 10 master students a year. We are exceptionally grateful for this opportunity that Rotary has given us to do that. We select 10 students from literally around the world, from different geographical parts of the world, different gender, cultural, racial backgrounds, with, in essence, the aim of educating the leaders of tomorrow. That is, provide with young people with the skills and the networks necessary to understand conflict, to solve conflict, so that once they are in power in a couple of decades from now, they are better equipped than the leaders of today to recognize conflict, solve conflict, deal with conflict, and build peace. We have, meanwhile, graduated over 200 Peace Fellows. There's over 200 alumni coming out of the University of Queensland. The core of the program is an 18-month master's program that involves courses, I'll list some of the courses here, on peace building, conflict resolution, mediation. I teach a course on nonviolent forms of social transformation. I've just finished a course a week ago, and we have usually around 30 to 40 students in the course.
Oh,
Yes?
no, sorry.
A question on that?
No, I'm sorry. I just got in.
Oh, you just got in. Okay. If
Sorry.
anyone has questions, just stop me. As I said, I don't feel I need to ramble on nonstop. So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to slow down, explain, discuss, and so on. But as I said, the sort of the core part of the Rotary Peace Fellow program is an 18-month master's program that includes core courses, but also the opportunity of fellows to choose elective courses in whatever field they specialize in. The program has a number of key components other than the master's program. I don't mention all of them, but I would like to mention our annual seminar, which takes place each year in April and is an opportunity for the fellows to interact with the local Rotary community. And what they usually do is they present what is called the applied field experience. That is an internship our fellows do over the summer months. They can basically pick an organization they would like to work with, and they are then sponsored to basically work with that organization, learn from them, pass on the knowledge they have acquired in our program. These are photographs from our annual seminar this year. And if you want to mark the date already, next year, our annual seminar is on the 13th of April, 2024. It's a one-day event at the University of Queensland. And if you are interested, you would be very, very welcome to attend. We also live stream the event at the same time. So these are just a few basic words on my background, on my involvement with Rotary, which has been a big part of my professional and other life over the last 22 years. And I really have come to appreciate Rotary as an absolutely amazing organization that does a lot of good work. As Daryl said, I had my first trip to Evanston just a few weeks ago for our annual meeting when we select the next generation, the next class of Peace Fellows, the ones who start in 2025. Would anyone like me to elaborate a bit more? Any questions before I kind of delve into the main topic of the day, the role of images in politics? I take it not. We can always do so at the end. But look, let me then talk what has been my topic for today, and that is the role of images in politics, the role of visuality in politics. This has been my research passion for a long time, 20, 30 years, really. In part because I feel images play an extremely important role in how politics is seen, conducted, perceived, and carried out. I jumped online this morning and looked at the New York Times, the Guardian, and the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, the Swiss paper I usually look at. And these are the screenshots from the newspapers this morning. As you can see, obviously, headlines about the Middle East, and you can see three very, very similar photographs on three completely different newspapers from around the world. This is to show that the knowledge we have, the information we get about politics is very, very often done in conjunction with images. So if you think now what's happened in the Middle East over the last months, very often our collective memory is linked to the photographs or the films, the video clips that we see. They shape our perception of events, they shape how we see politics and how we respond. The main research project I'm currently engaged in, and I won't talk about in detail, this is more sort of an illustration of why I think images are important, is a project in which I collaborate with 8 other researchers and 4 institutions, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Australian Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and World Press Photo Foundation, to find more ethical ways of visualizing humanitarian crisis. As you know, NGOs, again, we work with MSF and the Red Cross, they often use images in their campaigns. Images they know are very, very important to, for instance, get donations, to evoke compassion in people and to motivate people to donate money for humanitarian campaigns. Very often, the images that are used are the ones you see on top of victims in the global south. And a lot of people, meanwhile, recognize that these stereotypical images are quite problematic. They often depict victims in the global south in a stereotypical way, as passive, a starving mother and child, as kind of dependent on not having any power at all and being dependent on us. And there's a lot of critique about that. But the big problem is, our NGO collaborators tell us, is that these images actually work in funding campaigns. You know, people donate money when they see a starving mother and child. They can associate with a sense of compassion. Whereas seeing images that are more kind of respectful, like the one at the bottom, often doesn't evoke the same kind of empathy. So our entire project is about finding more respectful images of victims, more respectful images of different cultures that can at the same time evoke empathy, evoke compassion, and is still able to help NGOs in their donation campaigns. So we work with a whole range of people, photographers, experts on humanitarian politics, experts on history, on the role of emotions in politics, to do that. It's a 4 or 5 year project, and we have just started it. Happy to elaborate in a little more detail later if you like, but what I want to do primarily is basically give you a sense of why images are so important in politics, why our perceptions of politics and conduct of politics is so much dependent on visual factors. The first thing to notice is that images are very complex. I have given you examples of photographs that circulate on the news, but of course, photographs are not the only visual factors that shape politics. You know, we also know that often we get news through films. If you look at television, you have video clips. Our perceptions of politics is also shaped by the television shows we watch, by the videos we watch, by the Hollywood movie we see. They portray the world in particular ways. They portray enemies, they have, you know, racial stereotypes, gender stereotypes, all shaping how we understand the world. There's other visual factors that shape politics. You know, you see at the bottom left, the satellite images. You know, the war in Iraq was to a great extent justified by satellite images that allegedly saw weapons of mass destruction, which in the end were not proven to exist, but satellite images played a really, really important role in justifying the war in Iraq. Other factors play an important role. You know, cartoons. Newspapers often have cartoons that depict the world in certain ways, that try to capture complex political issues like the one on climate change before, through very, very short visual metaphors, in an attempt to rally our kind of, you know, perceptions around these issues. Video games play an important role, especially with the younger generation of people. The video game industry, there's far, far more money involved in that, for instance, than with Hollywood. It plays a really, really important role in shaping a younger generation of people. Then we have other visual factors like monuments. You see here the Vietnam monument. We know, for instance, the War Memorial in Canberra is all very visual in an attempt to show us how terrible war is, in an attempt to visualize the importance of remembering war. Other factors, visual factors are political. Even the clothes we wear are political. They're gendered. As a man, I wear certain kind of clothes. As a woman, one is expected to wear different clothes. These are visual factors that basically tell us how to behave in the world and how to act. So visual factors are very, very diverse and very kind of going across the spectrum. One of the big questions that people are asking at the moment is if there has something fundamentally changed in the role images work. So whether or not we actually live in a visual age, whether images are more important now than ever. Because images have always been around, of course. There's pre-modern cave dwellings, that show images carved into rock. So images have been around for a very long time. But scholars say there's at least two ways in which images work differently today. The first one is at the speed at which they circulate. This is an image I took in Korea almost 40 years ago. I worked in Korea in the demilitarized zone as a Swiss diplomat and a military officer between 1986 and 1988 in a commission that supervises the armistice agreement. And at that time, there were mass demonstrations in South Korea that led to big kind of democratization campaigns. So this is a photo I took of one of the big demonstrations of the presidential candidate Kim Dae-jung. Back then, people would take a photograph with a digital camera. It would then maybe take a day or two until this photograph was developed. It would be sent to New York, and at some point it would appear at the front page of the New York Times. That would take several days, usually, until this would happen. Today, a photograph of an election campaign rally can circulate literally within seconds around the world. There's no delay in time. Literally, we can take a phone, take a photograph, circulate it, and there's absolutely no delay. So the speed at which images circulate has changed fundamentally in quite a short period of time, even in just 10, 20 years. Again, the events in the Middle East, we can watch instantaneously what is happening in the Middle East. 30 years ago, we would have had to wait until the news, gets printed, until the newspapers get circulated, until they appear on CNN. That all took time. But this speed is actually very, very important in terms of how politics shapes, how visual factors shape politics. The second aspect that has changed in the way images circulate is the question of who has the power to circulate images. Again, I'll take you the image I took in 1986 or 87 here. Back then, actually, very, very few actors had the power to circulate images. These people here are photographers from the New York Times, from CNN. They were part of media conglomerates who had the power to circulate images. So it's literally only big media institutions and the state, they had the power to circulate images. Today, almost every single person has the power to circulate images. Many of us now have a mobile phone, we have a Facebook or Instagram account. We can literally take a photograph like here, we can instantaneously upload it on social media, and we can circulate images right away. Again, fundamentally different from 30 years ago, when very, very few people had that power. So that led to very much a democratization of the way in which images circulate and who has the ability to circulate images. Doesn't mean all is completely free. The internet has algorithms that shape who gets to see what and all that. But in essence, this provides a lot more opportunity for individuals, for social movements, for protest movements, but also for terrorist organizations, for instance, to circulate images. All the notorious beheading images of IS, they had a video camera, they managed to circulate that, they managed to spread their message in a way that wasn't possible 3 or 4 decades ago. Same with protest movements that take place locally. They almost immediately have the chance to become global, and many people can circulate that. Now, these are two ways in which the politics of images has very, very fundamentally changed in the last couple of decades. Again, here, refugees being able to document their lives right away. Now, 2 factors why images are particularly powerful, and I talk here primarily about photographs. One of them is that the power of icons. You know, you all probably are familiar with that image from 1989 from the Tiananmen massacre. So it's these kind of images that capture an entire situation through an iconic way of representing it. We know images of the Vietnam War like that. We know images of refugees like that. They can kind of make complex issues, reduce them to very, very kind of simple visual metaphors that can then be used to spread a certain image. The second reason why images are so powerful is that they are often deeply emotional. They capture us in our inner core. As I said, I work with humanitarian organizations who use images to gain support for their campaigns, because people who see images of crisis, they often react quite emotionally. You know very well that you often see on TV or on the internet that there's a warning that appears before images like these, or images of war, images of dead bodies, are circulated. You know, the warning usually says that in the following video, you will see images that some people find traumatic. You know, if you feel you might be disturbed, please don't be warned that if you continue watching. We never get these warnings when we read a book. You know, we never get a warning saying, look, you know, the next few pages are going to be having words that are deeply traumatic. You know, if you continue reading, you might be warned that the words might offend you. But words as well can hurt. Words can depict very kind of terrible things. But images somehow have the ability to get to our core right away. Now, these are two ways in which reasons why images are highly political. Now, before I thought we can go on to a broader discussion, I want to kind of outline a little bit of why I think images are so extremely powerful and why we have to understand them in a critical way. One factor is that images and photographs give us a certain illusion of authenticity. We have the sense, for instance, in this image, we almost have the sense that we can be there in 1989 and see exactly what is happening. This is not a painting. This is an authentic representation of what happened right then, you know, without mediation. We literally have a simulacrum of the world like that. But in reality, images often deceive. You know, they are highly political, they're highly arbitrary, they're highly subjective, and they're highly political. And again, I give you a couple of reasons for that. Not sure if some of you have seen this image before. What would you say are colors A and B? How would you describe colors A and B?
And what?
Sorry? Gray and white.
Gray,
Yes.
gray and white?
Gray and white, yeah. What if I were to tell you that color A and B are exactly the same color? Would you believe me?
Yeah, because of the background.
Of the background. Like when we take this image and we superimpose a bar in the middle, they are in reality exactly the same color. You can do that yourself if you put your fingers in front of your screen and block out the middle. You will see that AB is exactly the same color. So that goes to show, like, when what we see is not always what is out there. So when we look at images, we have to be very mindful that they can deceive us. They can show us the world in a way that's not quite how it actually is. But we don't always think about that. We often think that, you know, what we see is real, but it actually isn't. It's highly political. It's highly arbitrary. It can be quite selective. The second way in which we always have to be critical about what we see is an example here. That is, we have to kind of know how to read an image, what symbols are in there, but we also have to understand how an image is represented. What do you see in this image here? How would you interpret this image?
Gray?
Who is in there? What do these people do? What do these people signify?
Religious leaders pray.
So they're religious leaders. We know that because they're dressed in certain ways. Like, we have to know these symbols. They have certain hats. They have They carry a booklet in their hands, which is probably a religious booklet, a Bible, presumably. They have certain robes.
Authority and power.
They imbue power, yeah.
Mhm.
What else would you say? Is that a peaceful image? Is that a conflict image? Is that a...
Mhm. They really do, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, what I want to show with this image is when we look at an image, as a scholar, for instance, I as a scholar looking at the representation of the world, including, for instance, the representation of the Middle East, we always have to ask ourselves what is in the image and what is not. Because when a photographer takes a photograph, you have to frame the photograph. You know, you cannot take the photograph of the entire world around you. You frame it. You decide what you focus on and what not. So as a scholar, we always have to ask what is inside the image, who is not in the image, who gets left out. Now, I want to show you the same image, but with a different cropping, that is, with a different frame. This is the very same image, except it's framed differently. So the image gets a very, very different meaning. Here we can see three religious leaders in a seemingly apolitical, peaceful kind of way of celebrating Christianity. This image shows the complicity of the Catholic Church with the Nazi regime.
Yes.
Again, both are authentic representations of the world. They're not made up. They're real, but the framing shows us that images are always very, very political. They only show us a certain slice of the world. We don't often think about that when we think of politics, because we can't constantly question what we see, but we have to ask ourselves again, take the Middle East. No, what do we see? What do we not see? Who has made these choices for us? Who has decided to frame the world in this way? Because it's impossible to show everything. We have to decide what we focus on through images, but also through words. We have to select what we represent and why, and justify it. So these are some of the ways in which images are highly political. The last point I want to make, I know I've meant to have half an hour of presentation followed by half an hour discussion. So I want to be just 1 minute to say one more thing, is that these are all about how images represent the world, but images can also be political themselves. They can become political forces themselves. And there's two kind of examples here I want to give you. One is the torture images at Abu Ghraib. You might recall during the war in Iraq, where all of a sudden we had photographs of US Army personnel torturing Iraqi inmates. I won't show the images here in order not to traumatize people, but these images generated massive debate on the legitimacy of torture in the fight against terrorism. Now, the issue is everyone knew before that torture was happening. The New Yorker reported on it. No one seemed to be upset about it. There was no public discussions. It was only when we saw the visual images of torture that people were kind of really, really upset and wanted to talk about, is it legitimate to torture terrorist suspects? Is that a legitimate strategy in the war against terror? So images in that sense really, really triggered massive public debates on the use of torture in terrorism. Same a few years ago with an image of a 3-year-old Kurdish refugee, Alan Kurdi, who was found dead at a beach in Turkey. That image circulated around the world, and it led to massive discussion in Europe about how to deal with refugees. In Germany, for instance, it literally led to a big shift in how the public and politicians dealt with refugees, all based on one particular image that triggered these debates. So look, I said I don't want to ramble on too long. I'd much rather have a discussion with you. I might get rid of the slides for now. I can bring them up again if you'd like, but I thought it might be good to have a more interactive sort of part of the session now.
Roland, have you any comments on fake footage and images? I mean, sometimes in conflicts, and there's been accusations of that in the current conflict in the Middle East, of footage that's of some event or something that, and I'm trying to think of the example, but that actually was shot or filmed somewhere else. I mean, Media Watch often puts, yeah, you know, Paul Barry will often do stuff like that, or comment on stuff like that on Media Watch. But have you got any particular comments on that at all?
Look, except to say that this is a huge debate.
Yeah.
The circulation of fake images, and it's not just images that are taken somewhere else. There's now a big debate about artificial intelligence and how we can basically construct images on computer. I had a talk with a colleague yesterday, a collaborator, and they said they made a test of saying, you know, like using a visual version of ChatGPT and say, give us an image of, you know, US soldiers in Afghanistan with a stockpile of weapons. They immediately generated an absolutely amazing image of that looked real, but in fact, it was completely made up. You know, it was not real at all. But you cannot tell from the image whether this is a real image or a fake image. And that's going to be one of the really, really big debates in photojournalism. To what extent do we need to authenticate images? And to what extent can we allow some creativity? Because an image is never, as I said, entirely authentic. There's always an interpretation there. For instance, many photographers, they change the white balance of an image, they change the cropping. So it's not that we have a completely authentic image, but to what extent can we manipulate this image, and to what extent are we, you know, do we have to stop in terms of introducing new factors, in terms of using artificial intelligence and so on. That's a big debate, and many journalistic organizations are very strict about that because they want to keep the trust of the readers.
Roland, you've touched on sort of the implications of all of this for us as viewers around having to be critical and look at photographs in this way. And you're starting to talk about the implications for photographers, but can you talk a little bit more about the so what? You know, so what does all of this mean for people taking photographs?
Look, for people taking photographs, things has changed a lot. As I said, 30 years ago, it was basically professional photographers who would take the images. There were lots of big debates already back then. For instance, there was a big debate about to what extent you take photographs of people suffering, and to what extent you're complicit if you do so, to what extent you have an obligation to do so, what the ethical responsibility is of photographers. There is the issue of, as I said, when in our project around the search for more ethical visualizations of humanitarian crisis, to what extent we inform photographers who work with humanitarian organizations about how to depict crisis, to what extent to be sensitive of cultural difference, of gender difference, to what extent to avoid stereotypes of the global south, of indigenous people. So there's already a long history of debates on that. Today, of course, as I said, there's so much has changed in terms of how images circulate, in the sense that we all can do so. There's these fake images around the world. So now there's a lot more sort of responsibility on news outlets to figure out what images are appropriate to show, what are not, which ones are authentic, which ones are not. As you all know, we are bombarded with images, with news from around the world. Some sources are trustworthy, some are not. If you look at your Facebook account, your Twitter account, your Instagram account, you see all these different images. Some would be accurate, some are not. Some are fake accounts, some are fake images from correct accounts. So I think for both news outlets, but also for us as individuals, it is quite a big responsibility to figure out who do we trust and what do we see and how does that seeing shape us. So Rita, would you like to chair, or should I kind of call on people?
No, you're fine. No, it's fine. I think Bethany has a
Bethany has
her
hand up. Yeah.
Yes, partnering on what Jesse very importantly asked is that, you know, how do we translate this further again for our Rotary projects and within our visual campaigns? And I think that you really made some very, very important points that hopefully each one of us will take back to our clubs and to our districts. I was lucky in that my mother was a cultural anthropologist, and I did a master's in public health. And with all the volunteer work now coming into Rotary, I have seen that if you take that time and make, for an example, from a public health standpoint, if you make a program population specific, which is, again, Rotary has really touched on recently from what I've seen, is that you need to involve the population that you are going to be working with. And when you do a needs assessment, we are not just going in and telling somebody what they need, but you're asking what does that population think that they need and what do they want? And that will greatly affect your ability also to visually portray what they're asking for, to be culturally sensitive and specific, and also have a successful campaign. I can tell you in some volunteer work I did with a hurricane relief program that involved Red Cross, UNICEF, and several others. There was a strong imagery and a lot of backlash in the community after Hurricane Ivan and down in the West Indies, because programs were brought in and didn't involve their input, and that can really affect not only what your future abilities to work within those communities. That's very important, but also I've seen recently within our district and with my club personally, is working in food relief. And as you touched on very poignantly in the beginning of your discussion on your slides, is that power, there's so much power in imagery. So for an example, in a food relief, if you use an image of a starving child, you're going to get a much stronger emotional response from your community in terms of donations. Whereas, when we trialed, for an example, a very classic people of action imagery where we're showing members collecting food, you again are creating a certain perception that, what Rotary does and how we affect food relief, but you don't get the emotional appeal. So I think that you very aptly brought that around, that there is a way to do this. And how do we combine that with also being very sensitive to and staying away from that and I hate the term white savior, but I know that they've used that a lot in political courses that I've taken at university in the past, is that we need to be very careful in how we go in, and the power to affect what we ask our photographers to do or what we ask our members to capture and film is very important. And I'm very thankful that you've come to speak with us, because that's something I hope that everyone takes home with them, how very important that we need to be when we take these images.
Yeah, look, great. Look, these are exactly, as I said, the key issues that we're grappling with, and we will over the next 4 or 5 years in that project. In a sense that, like a lot of, as you mentioned, these stereotypical kind of images of crisis, they're often void of cultural context. They can be plugged into any context. A starving mother and child can be used for a genocide, for poverty. And it's really, really important to be aware of local context, to be respectful of local context, to bring local populations on board. But as you've precisely pointed out, this is not easy, because the starving mother and child is the kind of images where people immediately associate, they donate money. So what we do in our project, and is to elaborate a little bit more, is we want to sort of work with photographers to find images of crisis that are not stereotypical, but that can still evoke empathy, can still get this sense of crisis. So at the moment, we work with teams of photographers from various parts of the world. We'll meet up at World Press Photo Foundation in Amsterdam in April. And once we have a variety of alternative images, we work with social psychologists who actually test how people respond to these images. So they measure their emotional response, they measure their donation intentions to see what kind of alternative images can still evoke empathy, can still basically lead to donations. Because the NGOs we work with, MSF and the Red Cross in particular, they say, look, we know these images are problematic, we know that, but we have to be careful about using other images because we can't lose donations. So if you give us more certainty to tell us these are the types of alternative images that can still work, we'll use them, but give us the evidence first. So our project, in essence, wants to do precisely that. We want to explore alternative images and test precisely which ones work and which ones not. Because as you said, just showing happy faces, showing people who are actively in the process of rebuilding, that gives us a nice feeling, but it doesn't give us the sense of crisis, the sense of urgency, the sense of need to donate. So we want to find images that can capture crisis, capture urgency, capture empathy, but don't rely on stereotypes that are problematic. And we don't know quite what they are. This is very difficult because, it's also culturally specific, but this is sort of what I'll be grappling with for quite a long time over the next few years. And as I said, we work with the World Press Photo Foundation, which is one of the foremost organizations in photojournalism. And we work with a team at MSF and Red Cross and ICRC, fundraising people, political editors, photographers, to kind of work together towards seeing how we can establish better guidelines for the use of photographs in campaigns. I would be more than happy to work with Rotary as well if there's an interest in looking at that, because obviously you have similar kind of issues when you do campaigns. You want to be respectful of local people, but you also want to capture Rotarians and give them a sense that this is really important. This is something to pay attention to. So that's sort of where my big passion lies in terms of my research, in terms of where I'm going in the next few years. So we also work with two Indigenous collaborators. We sort of look at this context in Australia as well, how Indigenous people are being depicted, how they feel about it. So we plan to do a workshop next year with Indigenous people to basically just ask them, without us coming in with preconceived notions, how do you want to be represented? What are for you the big issues? What are for you the big problems that you see? And how can we learn from how you see the world and how you want to be depicted? So
Okay.
Yes, I think one of the challenges that we have in Rotary at the moment, as an example, is to end polio. To find images and videos of things that show that it is still current. Perhaps, it doesn't appear to be a connectedness in a lot of our Western countries anymore, where it seems to have gone for a long time. But it is still current, and we still need to keep that alive for Rotarians and the general public. I think that's a challenge in Rotary at the moment. One of the most powerful things that I think that I've seen in recent times is the presentation that was done at the convention in Melbourne on Pakistan, and showing the video of the people going to do it and what they actually went through. That was huge, but that had a lot of time associated with it. Whereas now we're still running, we do our end polio campaigns particularly around October and other times. But I do think that is something where we can easily fall into stereotypical things, and we're just giving them data, whereas images are so much more powerful. But again, they have to be authentic, and they can't be stereotypical, and they can't just keep being historical either.
Yeah.
That we do need to show that it is still current. So I think that is something that is a challenge for all of us in Rotary.
Yeah. I have as an example, I've done a bit of work, in fact, with a former Rotary Peace Fellow, Amy Kay, about 15 years ago, on looking at how HIV/AIDS was stereotypically portrayed in Africa. There's all these very kind of iconic images of a starving mother and child, a victim of HIV/AIDS. So we looked at a program in Addis Ababa that basically gave children affected by HIV/AIDS in families that are affected by it Polaroid cameras so that they could document themselves how everyday life from a children's perspective looks like. And then there were very, very different images, not about stereotypes, about everyday objects, needles, plastic gloves. And then these images were exhibited in local communities in an attempt to break down stereotypes about HIV, in an attempt to have a community dialogue. So that was sort of for us, a very interesting way of breaking some stereotypes. And it often happens at the community level, because you can't do that globally, otherwise you run into new stereotypes. It happens at the level of community, of engagement, of talking to local people. And that's where I also think why Rotary is doing such a good job, because a lot of it is based on local clubs and local engagements, not on, you have a universal program around polio, but a lot of the real work is done with local clubs and communities. And that's where actually change is most likely going to happen, by changing how people think, interact in a daily basis, talk to each other. So that to me is sort of the biggest hope of where things are eventually going to change.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Bethany.
Thank you. What would be your recommendation? For example, there's a program that's being started within our district where they're focusing predominantly on domestic violence. And the first thing that came to my mind is, how do you again, what would be the imagery that you could present that's similar to, again, as you mentioned, with Indigenous populations, is that we have to be careful that we do want to raise funds and awareness, but we also need to try and stay away from the stereotypes. So for an example, in Indigenous imagery, and not over in the US, but also within Australia and New Zealand, is that we're always presenting a portrayal of Indigenous in need and the need here, but we're not also portraying the successful outcomes and the successful communities and a strength and a cultural identity. We have to be very careful. So same thing is that how would you, for example, what would come to your mind perhaps in terms of how do we, is it just a victim perception of imagery? Because that, again, as you mentioned, being very emotionally jarring, or is there a way that you think that, is there a possibility of including imagery of a success or a moving past, or, it's, you can use some example of time heals, but a successful maybe transition away out of domestic, where would your thoughts go to on that? How would you approach that? Because that's where my mind was drawn to, is how do you attempt with video and imagery here? And
that's extremely difficult. I worked on a project a while ago where I looked at the role of images in global politics in the many different contexts. And one of the contexts I worked with a colleague, Ariela Azulay, on sexual violence. And she looked at how there was mass rape at the end of World War II in Berlin, other German cities, by occupation forces. In many wars around the world, rape is always a key war strategy, very common. But there's virtually no photographs. These take place outside of being visualized. And that's one of the issues that, that they take place behind the gaze of us. So Ariela tried to figure out, how do we actually visualize something that is not being visualized, that is visualized by its absence? And, again, domestic violence, you're not going to find photographers documenting domestic violence directly. That often takes place behind the scene. It's terrible. And it's something that, as a result, images can't really capture in its entire political, emotional, traumatic dimension. So how do you do that? I don't know. Like Ariela sort of used it by photographing decaying buildings during the war as a metaphor for it, but you'd have to find something to visually capture a metaphor without actually capturing what domestic violence is all about. Not easy at all. There are films that do so, that like fictional films that try to provide an insight, and that's where films are really important, even though they're fictional, but they kind of give us a sense of how terrible domestic violence is, how lasting the impact is, how desperate the situation is. But this is one of the big questions about how to visualize the invisible. The
only thing that I'd come up with is similar to again, a photo campaign with a photographer I've worked with in the US on breast cancer, where he was using bras in the backyards of different people across the entire country. And the only thing I could think of was, again, for example, what women and families often leave without. So I thought, is there a possibility of, again, what often they have to leave without, and what we have to provide, perhaps as a community foundation. That's something that I could think that could be culturally sensitive, but show in your face, to try and do an emotional appeal, is that this is what often people leave, which is basic necessities. And I know that even collecting cell phones was one idea, is that, they don't even leave often without a sense of communication. That was the other thing.
Good point. Sort of aftermath photography in terms of documenting the traces of it, the effects, the trauma of it. Again, I have a colleague who works on, a photographer takes photographs of scenes where World War I battles took place and looks at how they look today, like forest places and so on, as a way of remembering what happened decades ago, mass atrocities. And he could, in a similar way, document, everyday effects of domestic violence as a way of demonstrating how lasting the effect is. Look, I don't think there's any easy solution. There's not one solution, but I think visuals are so important in conveying to us these issues. Words are important too, but visuals become more and more important, and they give us this sort of emotional insight. They capture things, complex things in very kind of simple ways, and that's why I was so drawn to the role of images and the importance they play in politics.
Jesse, you had your hand up. Jesse?
I wanted to say something to Roland, but it's on a slightly different topic. So I wonder if there are some more questions on today's topic.
Well, we're about to finish up shortly, so yep.
Oh well, well, can I say my piece? Can I say something
Yes.
then?
Go ahead, Jessie.
Definitely.
Roland, I wanted to thank you for your wonderful work with our Peace Centre. You know, peace is a cornerstone of Rotary, and our Peace Centre program is held lovingly and dearly by so many people, and is such an important part of Rotary's value proposition. So thank you for everything that you do to run such a successful program at the University of Queensland.
Thank you very much. It feels too enjoyable to be called work. So it's been really a great privilege to work with so many fellows. And as I said, over the last 21 years, I taught the course just about every single year, a master's course, for about a dozen years on ethics and human rights, and the last sort of dozen years or so on nonviolence as a form of conflict resolution, a form of social transformation. So I've literally witnessed about 22 generations of Rotary Peace Fellows, and they're absolutely amazing. They're diverse, they're smart, they come from all parts of the world, and we are exceptionally grateful for your support for the program, the sponsorship, and and also not just the financial sponsorship, but there's host area counselors who pitch in a lot in terms of helping the fellows when they arrive and getting them settled, helping them during their stay here. So our collaboration with Rotary is one of the most wonderful professional things I've been lucky to be involved in over the last couple of decades. So thanks to all of you. So,
well, I'd just like to conclude with thanking Roland very much. I had the enormous privilege of actually sitting in on one of his classes on this topic that he's presented today, and as part of the political sciences program, and also as part of the Peace Centre, and that prompted that we really needed to think about what we do. We need to take time on what we publish. We need to make sure we keep our ethical standards there. We need to be careful with our cropping on our photos, and also whether we're showing suffering or happiness and how we go about that. And I think Roland has presented that very beautifully today in a very thoughtful and inspired way, and with many, many years, and we won't talk about how many, Roland, of experience and knowledge. I would just like to remind everybody of one of Roland's points earlier in the webinar, and that is that the peace seminar that the Peace Fellows present on the 13th of April next year, either live or online. Both are available. I have missed a couple in my years of Rotary, but I tried not to miss them. And now that they're online, I haven't missed any since then. But it's a wonderful experience of what those students do and what such great professors like Roland actually give to our people that we support. And so with that, I'd like to thank Roland very much and ask everybody else to think in the normal fashion.
thank you very much.
And I'll hand back to Sarita.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. Thank you for those lovely words to Roland. I was sitting here thinking, gosh, it was such a thought-provoking presentation, Roland. And things around the balance between empathy and not undermining someone's dignity in matters of crisis. We need to get those images out, but how do we do that without undermining someone's dignity? So there is a fine balance, isn't there? So, but no, thank you so much for all what you do, and hopefully I can join in on your 13th April seminar, which I'm sure will be wonderful. So everybody, thank you so much for this. I will send you the recording from today's session, hopefully in the next couple of days. And we'll also make it available on the Rotary Zone 8 YouTube channel, because this type of information needs to be shared widely to everybody. It's a small snippet, but obviously for part of a bigger subject. But it was a great introduction, Roland. Thank you for that. But ask those difficult questions. And as I always say, if you need any help in the public image space, you can reach out to the Zone 8 Public Image team, and we are quite happy to help you out in any way we can. So our contact details on the Rotary Zone 8 website. And for the next year, so this was the last session for 2023, and we will start again in February. So we have February, March, and April, and so that will be the sort of the end of our public image learning sessions. We will have some sessions in between, but as and when they become available, I'll send that note out to you. And in terms of the topic, the content, the team is working behind the scenes on those, and I will share those as soon as I can. All right, so do keep an eye out on the Rotary Zone 8 website, the social media pages, Rotary Oceania pages, and also my Facebook page, if you can, and the regional newsletter, Rotary on the Move. If you're subscribed to it, that would be great. So to all of you, thank you so much for your attention and your passion, and for supporting us over this year, over the last couple of years, and joining in on all our webinars. And finally, enjoy the rest of your day. And if I don't see you, I hope you and your families have a safe and happy Christmas holiday. And do take care, and look forward to seeing you once again soon. And on the count of 3, I will end this session. 3, 2, 1, stop recording.